Hello, Dr. Mannu here. Today I want to talk about specific foods. I want to talk about the foods that are good for us, the foods that are healthy for us, and also the foods that we should avoid and why we should avoid those foods. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of wrong information about foods, and I think it's important to clarify some of the information that we hear about the foods that we consume. I've organized these foods into the different food groups. So we'll talk about foods under carbohydrates, proteins, fats and oil. And in another video, I will talk about condiments, fruits and vegetables. So let's start with carbohydrates. So I'll talk about specific food. So we'll start with rice. So is rice good for you? Absolutely. Rice, I would say any natural food is good for us. If food is in its natural state, I think the basic assumption should be that food is good for us. If the food is processed, then we have to be careful. So let's continue with carbohydrates. Rice is good. If it's white rice, then we have to be careful because white rice is processed food. White rice is brown rice that has been polished, bleached, so it definitely contains chemicals which are most likely harmful for us. And also, white rice has been stripped of a lot of its nutrients. So with rice, I would say be careful with white rice, and it's preferable to eat brown rice. Potatoes are also good. Potato is a natural food. They are better if they are boiled. Potato is a problem if it's fried in oil, especially if it's fried in unhealthy oils, and we will talk about the unhealthy oils. So potato is a good food. Sweet potato, this is also good for us. It's a tuber, it's natural. Corn, we have to be careful with corn. A lot of corn, especially imported corn from the United States, can be genetically modified. And for now, I think we should all stay away from genetically modified food. There's a lot we need to learn about genetics of food, and I think it's still too early to promote genetically modified foods. I would say with corn, be sure that it's normal, natural corn and not corn from a genetically modified variety. Cereals. In my opinion, processed foods are not exactly good because, when food is processed, it undergoes a lot of chemical changes that might change the state of the nutrients in that particular food. So especially if you have diabetes or if you have any chronic disease, I would encourage you to stay away from cereals. There are better alternatives like oats. Oats are pretty good. Just make sure it's as consciously farmed as possible, and it's also organic. Pasta. Now, it depends on what the pasta is made from. So most pasta is made from wheat, and wheat is genetically modified. So you've got to be careful. If you want to consume pasta, I would say the best form of pasta would be rice pasta or like pasta made from lentils. And if you have to consume normal pasta, just make sure the pasta is made from spelt wheat. Spelt wheat is the most natural form of wheat today. So spelt wheat is not genetically modified. Okay. All right. Tubers are good for us. They are natural. So I'm referring to foods like cassava, tapioca, or yam. If you know about these foods, they are definitely healthy for us. And there's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. In fact, the brain needs carbohydrates to function properly. So diet fads like low carb diets are not exactly good for your brain. Your brain needs sugar It also needs fat. What's important is you have a balanced diet. So where you're eating natural foods, or foods that are as natural or as consciously farmed as possible, and not processed. And then you should eat equal amounts of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats and oil. So it's just really being sensible with the foods you consume. Okay. Then we have we've discussed wheat, and then flour. I mean, if you bake or you cook, just be very careful with the kinds of flour that you use. I would say the worst kind of flour would be wheat flour, because it's most likely it will be genetically modified. All right, let's talk about proteins. Beans, all forms of beans are good for you. So black eye beans, white beans, brown beans, kidney beans. The thing with beans is it usually needs processing to remove the a lot of beans would contain certain kinds of poisons, so they would normally come in a jar or in a tin. So what you have to watch out for is that they don't contain preservatives, or they contain natural preservatives. Chickpeas are good for you as well. Soybeans. Now, soybeans is a tricky one. The soybeans is consumed a lot in Asian countries, and over there, in fact, they don't consume as much as people are encouraged to consume in the West. So we have to be careful with soybeans. I would say, if possible, avoid soybeans, because it's usually not properly processed when you get them from the supermarkets. And soybeans contains goitrogens. So they contain chemicals that would bind to iodine and deprive the body of iodine. In fact, they also interfere with absorption of nutrients. So in general, avoid as much as possible soybeans. Be careful with soybeans. The same with tofu. Tofu is made from soybeans, and it's promoted a lot as a healthy diet. But I would say avoid these foods. Soy, tofu, they contain lots of estrogens. And for men, you don't want a lot of estrogens in your body. This is why a lot of natural hormonal medications are made from soy, because soy is high in estrogen. So be careful with soy. Be careful with soy derivatives like tofu. Lentils are good. They're a good source of protein. A lot of people don't consume lentils, or they would consume lentils in a jar. I think with beans and lentils, it's really best to cook them fresh. Avoid as much as possible beans in a jar or tinned beans, and try and get the seeds and cook them. Lots of beans, you need to soak them in water for maybe a day, maybe 12 hours, and then you need to cook them for a long time. There are lots of recipes online. They are very easy to cook. Brown lentils, just all you need to do is just cook them for about an hour, add salt, add black pepper, add your condiments, and they're ready to consume. Eggs. Now, eggs have a bad reputation, but from all my research, eggs are incredibly good for you, and you can consume as many eggs as you want. There was actually a study that I read, some man who consumed, I think, about a dozen eggs every day for years. And when doctors did a check on his health status, they found he was incredibly healthy. He had normal levels of cholesterol, his liver function, his kidney function, everything was perfect. So eggs are good for you, Eggs contain lots of protein, lots of the egg yolk contains fat, and these are healthy for you. Bacon, these are processed foods. So with bacon, you've got to be really careful. I would say if you have to consume bacon, just make sure you're consuming good quality bacon, preferably bacon made from organic meat, organic pork. Sausages, this is the same. You'd want to avoid processed sausages. It's got to be as natural as possible if you have to consume it. And it should also contain no preservatives. There are lots of chemicals that are added to bacon and sausages. So just make sure you're consuming very healthy bacon or very healthy sausages made from organic or consciously sourced meat. Now we get to dairy: cheese, milk, yogurt, butter, kefir. If you have a chronic respiratory problem, I would say you have to be careful and cut back on these foods, because dairy promotes the production of mucus in the body. And for anyone with, for example, asthma or any lung disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, you just have to be very careful with dairy. And also just ensure that the dairy you're consuming is made from organic milk. This is very important. If you can get raw milk, that's even better. The same applies to cheese. Kefir or kefir is a form of fermented milk, and it's very rich in probiotics. You want to make sure that the dairy or dairy byproducts that you consume are made from organically sourced milk. Peas. Now, the problem I have with peas is, we do a full body scan, and I find a lot of people are sensitive to peas. And I think this is because of the way it's processed. It's possible there are chemicals that are added to peas. Most of the time we can only get peas in a tin or in a jar. So I would say avoid peas as much as possible. There are other sources of protein like beans and lentils. Chicken, with meat, you have to be very careful. I saw a program the other day, and someone was, well, actually it was a food processing plant, and they showed how the workers in this plant would inject chicken with this jelly-like material, right, to bloat the chicken, to blow it up so it looks larger than it is. This is really bad practice. So you've got to be careful with where your meat is coming from. If it's normally farmed chicken, this is good. If you can get it organic, this is also good. The same applies to eggs. Just make sure you're not getting eggs from anywhere. Just ensure that you're getting healthy, consciously farmed foods. So chicken is good for you, but you have to be careful of the source of the chicken. Beef is also good. Vegetarian diet is being promoted a lot. I was vegetarian for 8 years and I had lots of health problems, and I'm glad I never promoted it, because I think for some people, or maybe for all of us, we need a little bit of meat. So if you're vegetarian and you're having digestive problems, perhaps you should really consider adding some meat to your diet. And again, with beef, you've got to be very careful. Make sure it's organic beef. Don't eat a lot of it. If you find that organically sourced meat is expensive, then reduce the amount you consume. Okay, pork. Personally, I'm not a fan of pork. I haven't read anything negative about pork, but this is not a food that I would normally consume. But if you do, just make sure you're sure of where it's coming from. Fish. So the problem with fish today is our oceans are toxic. The oceans contain lots of chemicals, mercury, and fish and seafood absorb these toxins. And it's worse for fish with a lot of fats like salmon and tuna. So you've got to be very careful. Some people suggest consuming like deep sea fish, deep sea salmon, if you can find it, if you can trust the source. But I think if you want to be careful, you're better off eating smaller fish like mackerel and sardines. The smaller fishes, the less toxins, the less mercury it would accumulate in its tissues. So just be very careful with fish. If you consume a lot of tuna or salmon, I would say just cut back a little bit, because it's very hard to verify the source of these foods. Seafood, be careful with seafood. I like prawns. I'm not a fan of other kinds of seafoods like lobster, but I don't think there's anything wrong with them. You just have to be careful that they're coming from a healthy, or they're healthy and coming from a good source. Okay, let's look at fats and oils. I think the commonest source of fats that we consume is avocados, and avocados are really good. This is incredibly healthy superfood. So add avocados to your diet. These are very good for you. And with oils, what we need to note about oils is that the so-called vegetable oils are toxic. Corn oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, these should be avoided. I think these vegetable oils are the single source of the increased rate of cardiovascular disease over the years. In fact, if you look at like a graph of cardiovascular disease and how it's increased over the years, you would find there was a jump when vegetable oils was introduced to the world. So avoid vegetable oils as much as possible. Imagine distilling oil or producing oil from corn. Right? If you eat sweet corn, you would know there's absolutely nothing oily about sweet corn. So how can you produce oil from such foods? So avoid these vegetable oils. The best forms of oil, or the best oils, are your extra virgin olive oil. So it's got to be extra virgin. It has to be cold pressed. Any other form of olive oil is adulterated. There are lots of materials out there, and every day we hear the news of how perhaps, I read something about how 100 olive oils from Italy were tested, and they didn't even have enough of the, I think, flavonoids or what the special chemicals that make olive oil what it is. So olive oil is good, but just make sure it's extra virgin olive oil. Coconut oil is also a good oil. You can add that to your diet. And I know coconut oil protects the brain as well. So it contains medium chain triglycerides, which are good for the brain. So just be very careful with oils. Coconut oil is good. Peanut oil, I'm not very sure about peanut oil. I would stick to saturated oils. So the problem with vegetable oils is it contains a lot of unsaturated fats. So unsaturated fats are fats that cannot withstand high temperatures. You basically can cook with them. They break down into toxic compounds as soon as you try to heat them up. So olive oil is not like that. There was a study done a few years ago that showed that olive oil is the best form of oil. So it doesn't break down into toxic compounds. They compared olive oil against coconut oil and other vegetable oils, and it came out tops. So olive oil is good for you. Avocado oil is also good for you. Okay, so these are some of the foods I just decided to review today. And in the next video, I'll be talking about fruits and vegetables and condiments, and also discussing alcohol and the need for water. Until then, bye.